They say wedding halls are loud, all clinking glasses, laughter, and jazz tucked behind gauzy curtains. But that night all I heard was the word, "not you." I was already halfway out of my chair. My knees don't love sudden movements anymore, but I'd practiced that stand, steady, slow, proud. The speech was in my pocket, folded twice. I'd ironed my suit that morning, polished my shoes the old-fashioned way. I had trimmed my beard just enough to look distinguished, not trying too hard. This was his day, my son's, and I was ready to honor it, with 3 minutes of memories and a single line that would have made the room smile. But then she appeared beside me, his new wife. The veil framed her face just so, and her perfume smelled like lilacs and champagne. She didn't smile. She leaned in and whispered, "Not you. Sit down. This part's for real family." My hand was still on the back of the chair when she turned away, already waving her own father forward like I was some usher who'd accidentally wandered into view. I sat back down before anyone could see my face change. No one looked at me. No one asked. My son laughed at something the man said into the microphone, called him the kind of dad I always dreamed of having. I felt the paper in my pocket like a second heartbeat. I didn't leave then. That would have drawn attention. I sat through the clapping, the speeches, the flash of the camera I was never asked to pose for. I listened to stories that rewrote our history like I'd never been part of the chapters. And still I nodded. Still I smiled. Because that's what fathers do, right? We hold the edges of the celebration and let others shine in the middle. But I'll tell you this. Nothing prepares you for the moment your child forgets your voice in a room full of strangers. Nothing bruises quieter than being told you no longer qualify as family, and nothing is heavier than a folded piece of paper in your pocket, full of words no one will ever hear. It started before the wedding, though I didn't know it at the time. Just small things. The kind of moments you excuse without realizing you've swallowed something hard. I remember the first time I met her family, her parents, I mean. It was a Sunday. My son, Michael, invited us all for a brunch at their new place. I wore my good shoes, brought a bottle of wine even though it was 10 a.m. The label had gold foil on it. I thought it looked nice, proper. I knocked, waited. When the door opened, it was her mother who greeted me. "Oh," she said, surprised, "you're early." I wasn't. I double-checked the time twice. I stepped in and offered the wine. She didn't take it, just looked past me and called out, "Michael, your dad's here." He came down the hallway holding a coffee mug, distracted. "Hey, Dad," he said, not unkind, but like someone greeting the mailman. No hug, no warmth. He was wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," though I doubt he cooked anything. His fiancée, Amanda, waved from the kitchen island. "Hi, Mr. Wells," she said cheerfully. "We weren't sure if you were coming." I blinked. "Of course I'm coming," I said. "You invited me." She smiled like it didn't matter either way and turned back to her mixing bowl. The table was already set. Avocado toast, smoked salmon, little glasses of fresh squeezed juice. Nothing I recognized. Her father arrived 15 minutes later with loud footsteps and a booming laugh that filled the room like a marching band. Amanda kissed him on the cheek, called him Daddy, and pulled out a chair. Michael stood to greet him. He hadn't stood when I arrived. I sat at the far end of the table, across from a tall vase of tulips that blocked my view. I tried leaning left, then right. Gave up. Amanda's mother poured mimosas for everyone, but didn't offer me one. Said something about medications and age. I wasn't even on anything that would interfere. I drank water. I told a story about Michael once burning toast as a boy and blaming the dog. Her father laughed politely, then changed the subject. Amanda didn't smile. "Let's not embarrass him," she said. "I wasn't," I started. "It's fine," Michael interrupted. "Dad likes to joke." I nodded, took another sip of water. My throat felt dry. Later, after the meal, Amanda unwrapped a thin white box. Inside was a gold-plated cake server with their initials engraved in the handle. Her mother gasped. Her father made a toast, something about joining two families, about tradition, about building a legacy. Amanda dabbed her eyes. Michael looked at him like he was the North Star. No one looked at me. I wanted to say something about how I still had the cake knife from our wedding, his mother's and mine, how we used it for every birthday, how I was going to bring it for theirs. But I didn't. I stood up and said I had to get back, something about the cat needing food. I don't even have a cat. Michael walked me to the door but didn't follow me out. As I stepped off their porch, I turned back once. Through the window, I saw Amanda's father still standing, refilling glasses, telling a story with wide, confident hands. Everyone was laughing. I remember thinking how easily they'd built a picture, a perfect, tidy family photo, and how naturally I didn't fit in the frame. It wasn't cruel. That's the part that stung the most. It was casual, unspoken, accepted. Like the world had turned a page and I'd been left in the last chapter without notice. You don't realize it right away, that you've gone invisible. It doesn't happen in one moment, not a slam of a door or a pointed insult. It happens in teaspoons and sighs, in what's not said, in what's no longer asked. After brunch that day, I began to notice things. Or maybe I just started admitting them to myself. Michael stopped calling, not suddenly, just less. A week would pass, then two. I'd text him, a simple message. How's everything going? Sometimes he'd reply with an emoji, a thumbs up, a smiley face, like we were co-workers passing in the hall, not father and son. I kept busy. That's what I told people, made my coffee at 6:30 every morning. Black, 2 pieces of toast, 1 with marmalade. Sat at the little round table by the window, listened to the weather report, even though I rarely went anywhere that depended on the forecast. I still cooked on Sundays, roasts mostly. The kind his mother used to make, slow-cooked, herbs tucked under the skin, garlic mashed potatoes with heavy cream. I cooked enough for 2 out of habit. Then 3 Sundays in a row, I caught myself setting a second place. Fork, knife, napkin folded just so. Then I'd remember, he doesn't come by anymore. Not since he moved in with Amanda. The first time I offered to drop off leftovers, he said, "We're doing meal prep now, Dad. Amanda's on a plan." The next week I offered again. "We're cutting back on salt." By the third time, I just wrapped the roast in foil and put it in the freezer. Even the cat next door stopped showing up when I sat outside with scraps. I still went to the hardware store on Saturdays. Walked the aisles slowly, hands behind my back like a man browsing a museum. Bought things I didn't need, a new wrench, replacement bulbs, a tiny box of screws. Once I bumped into Michael there. He was with Amanda, holding a basket filled with curtain rods and drawer organizers. "Oh," he said, like he'd spotted a former teacher. Amanda nodded politely. "We're remodeling the office," she said. "We're going for a more modern feel." I said it sounded nice. I asked if they needed help. Michael's smile was tight. "We've got it covered, Dad." "Of course," I said. "I'm just down the road if anything comes up." Amanda turned away to check prices. Michael looked over his shoulder once, said, "Thanks, though." And that was it. I stood there in the aisle for a while after they left, looking at a display of light bulbs. Cool white, soft white, daylight. Everything seemed too bright. At home, I watered the plants. Read old paperbacks I already knew the endings to. Watched the news. Watched it again 2 hours later. Sometimes I watched it muted, just to fill the room with moving faces. I got a new calendar in the mail, a wildlife one from a charity I once donated to. I hung it in the kitchen. The photo for June was a stag on a hill. I stared at it for a long time, then wrote Michael's wedding on the square. Then I crossed it out. Not because I wasn't invited, I was, but because I didn't know what part I'd play, if any. He mentioned once, briefly, that Amanda's father would be doing the main toast. Said it casually, like weather. "He's good with speeches," Michael said. "Knows how to work a crowd." I nodded, said I'd keep mine short. "Oh," he said, like it hadn't occurred to him I might want to speak. "We're still finalizing the program." I didn't ask again. The days stretched, filled with small silences, like spaces between notes in a song no one was humming anymore. One morning, I made pancakes the way Michael liked them as a boy. Tiny ones, the size of silver dollars. Crisp at the edges, soft in the middle. I used the same pan, the same spatula. I even sliced bananas to go on top. Then I sat at the table, alone, and ate each one slowly. Tasted like memory. He hasn't asked for pancakes in 20 years. Still, I made them. Still, I waited. Because some habits feel like hope in disguise, but that morning I knew. It was just routine now, and I was the background noise in his life, not the melody, not the chorus. Just something you learn to ignore. I remember the first time he called me Dad like it meant something. He was 5, maybe 6, small enough that his sneakers lit up when he walked, brave enough to think he could fly if he jumped from the porch steps with enough speed. That summer, he begged me to take the training wheels off. "Are you sure?" I'd asked. He nodded, eyes wide, helmet too big for his head. We lived on a quiet street back then. Not much traffic. The kind of neighborhood where dogs barked from behind fences and sprinklers ticked in early evening. I set the bike upright, held the back of the seat, and ran behind him as he pedaled like a wind-up toy. "Don't let go," he'd yell. "I won't," I'd say, even though I knew I would. Because that's the whole point, isn't it? You hold them until they believe they can do it on their own. Then you let go, hoping they won't notice when you do. He fell, of course, scraped his elbow on the sidewalk. I remember the blood wasn't bad, but the tears were. Not from pain, from fear, from disappointment. I knelt beside him, pulled a tissue from my pocket, and wiped the dirt from his knee. "I can't do it," he said. "You did," I said gently. "You made it halfway down the block." He looked up at me, bottom lip trembling. Yeah, I smiled. "And next time, you'll make it to the corner." He nodded and stood, shaky but determined. That night I carried his bike into the garage and made him hot chocolate with too many marshmallows. We sat on the couch, his head on my shoulder, and watched a cartoon I didn't understand. He giggled at every joke. I laughed at the sound of his laughter. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered just before he drifted off. "You're the best." I held still, afraid to breathe, afraid to wake him. That tiny moment, that small sentence, it warmed something in me I didn't know had gone cold. Years later, when he was a teenager and spoke mostly in grunts, I'd think of that night. I'd hold it in my pocket like a lucky coin, worn and smooth. Proof that I'd done something right once. There were other moments too. When his mother got sick, that long, hard year of appointments and quiet dread, he'd sit with me in the waiting room, sometimes holding my hand, sometimes just close enough to make the silence less heavy. When she passed, it was Michael who stood beside me, straight-backed in his first real suit, hand clenched around mine so tight I could feel the tremble in his fingers. After the service, he hugged me in front of everyone, pressed his forehead to my shoulder. "We'll be okay," he whispered. I believed him. Later, when he went off to college, I helped him move into that tiny dorm room with the bunk beds and peeling posters. We carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs, both of us pretending we weren't tired. At the door, he hesitated. "Thanks for everything, Dad." I gave him a nod, didn't say much. I was too choked to speak. But he came home for holidays, called every other week, asked for advice about jobs, taxes, cooking chicken without giving himself food poisoning. We weren't loud about our love, but it was there, built into the space between sentences, stitched into routine. When he first told me about Amanda, he sounded excited. Nervous but happy. He asked what I thought of her. "I haven't met her yet," I said, "but just from the pictures." He pressed. "She looks kind," I said, and he beamed like I'd given him a blessing. The first time he brought her over, I made spaghetti. He'd always liked mine better than his mother's, though he never said it aloud. That night, Amanda picked at her plate, barely touched the sauce. "Are there preservatives in this?" she asked. I said no, just garlic and herbs from the garden. She smiled without showing teeth. "Oh." Michael didn't say anything. He poured wine, changed the subject. I didn't think much of it then, not until I looked back. It's funny how your mind organizes memories like books on a shelf. Not in order of time, but in weight. And the heaviest ones aren't always the loudest. They're the quiet moments, the ones where love was assumed, where you didn't need to ask if you belonged, where a small voice whispered, "You're the best." And you believed it, not because you needed to, but because you knew it was true. That's the contrast I carry now. Not bitterness, not regret. Just the stark difference between a boy who once clutched my hand with trust and a man who now looks past me at dinners, who forgets I taught him how to tie his first tie, who no longer asks for my stories or my spaghetti or my advice. And maybe the ache isn't that I've been excluded. Maybe it's that I remember a time I was included so fully, so tenderly, that I didn't think it would ever fade. But everything fades, even names at the end of a guest list. There was a moment, just one, where I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd misread it all. It happened during the dinner, after the toast I never gave. I'd gone back to my table, the one tucked near the dance floor, away from the family cluster, and just close enough to hear the clink of forks on china. My name card said William Wells in small cursive. No title, no mention of fatherhood or relation. But the chair was padded and the napkin was cloth, and I told myself that counted for something. I sat quietly, folding and unfolding the corner of my napkin, while around me laughter lifted like smoke. Amanda's father had finished his speech, a confident, polished performance, and now people were buzzing, smiling, patting him on the back. I had tried not to listen. Still, I heard the words, "That was perfect. You're such a natural. Michael's lucky to have you." One woman, I think it was Amanda's aunt, leaned over to him and said, "I've never seen a father speak like that. You just captured him." I reached for my water. The glass trembled slightly against the saucer. My fingers had gone cold. Then, out of nowhere, Michael laughed, loud and bright, the way he used to when we played board games, and I let him win. He turned slightly in his chair, scanning the room, and for half a second his eyes landed on me. It wasn't long, a flicker really, but I saw it. Recognition, and I thought, there it is. There's my boy. Maybe he'll come over. Maybe he'll say, "Sorry, Dad, things got busy. Come give your speech now." Maybe he'll just sit beside me, put a hand on my shoulder, say nothing at all. I sat up a little straighter, smoothed the edge of my jacket. The speech was still in my pocket, warm now from the heat of my palm. One corner had worn thin from how many times I'd folded it. He stood then, walked across the room. I watched him move through the crowd, people reaching out to shake his hand, clap his back, tug at his sleeve. He paused near my table. I felt my throat tighten, but he didn't stop. He turned, bent toward Amanda's grandfather, who had risen slightly to adjust his suspenders. They laughed together, something about the old days, no doubt. Michael patted his shoulder and kept going. My back eased against the chair again, my fingers uncurled from the napkin. That flicker, that small glimmer of connection, had been nothing. Just a passing glance, a light catching on glass that isn't really a reflection at all. The waitstaff began serving the main course, rosemary chicken, wild rice, something with balsamic glaze. A woman in a floral dress sat beside me, middle-aged, friendly enough. She looked at me over the rim of her wine glass. "Are you with the groom's side or the bride's?" I hesitated, then said, "Groom's." "Oh," she smiled, then tilted her head. "Are you a cousin?" I blinked. "I'm his father." Her face shifted, not embarrassed, just surprised. "I didn't realize," she said gently. "Amanda's dad. He gave such a heartfelt toast. I assumed—" She didn't finish. "I didn't need her to." I nodded. "Yeah, he did." We ate in silence for a while. The rice was slightly underdone, the chicken a little dry, but that wasn't what made it hard to swallow. Later, when dessert was announced, a multi-tiered cake with sugar orchids and lemon custard, I excused myself, said I needed some air. No one noticed me leave. In the hallway, I passed a mirror. I paused, looked at myself. The tie was slightly askew, my collar a bit rumpled. I smoothed it out, fixed the angle, straightened my shoulders, but I didn't look like a father at a wedding. I looked like a man who had come too late to something that used to belong to him. I walked slowly toward the coat room. My speech stayed in my pocket. By then, the creases had turned the paper soft as fabric. Outside, the wind had picked up. I pulled my coat tighter, breathed in the cool air, and waited. Not for a ride, not for anyone to come after me. Just waited until the hum of celebration was faint enough to let go of. Hope is a stubborn thing. It sticks to your ribs long after it stops feeding you. But that night, as the lights from the banquet hall faded behind me and my footsteps echoed in an empty corridor, I felt something shift. Not break. Just settle. Like a door gently closing, and this time I didn't turn back to see if anyone noticed I was gone. Because I already knew. The house was quiet when I got home. Not peaceful quiet, not the kind that comes after a long day, with slippers waiting and dinner warming in the oven. This was the kind of quiet that echoed. That pressed in on your chest like the air had thickened. I didn't turn on any lights, didn't take off my coat. I just stood in the front hallway, listening for what I don't know, maybe for the sound of a voice that hadn't spoken my name all night. Maybe for a moment that would make it feel worth it. My hand drifted to my jacket pocket. The speech was still there. By now it had softened from the warmth of my skin, the corners curled, the middle creased into near translucence. I didn't unfold it. I didn't need to. I knew every word. Michael, when you were 7, you rode your bike straight into a hedge because you were too proud to ask for help turning. You came inside with twigs in your hair and said, "I meant to do that." They would have laughed. I know they would have. Tonight I see that same pride, that same boldness, and I know, without a doubt, that you're ready for this journey. A clean ending, just enough warmth, nothing sappy, no guilt. But it had stayed in my pocket, unspoken, because my voice didn't belong in that room, not anymore. I walked to the kitchen. It was too clean. Everything in its place, no dishes in the sink, no glasses left out. Like even the house had started living without me. I poured a glass of water, stared at the tap while it filled. My reflection in the window was faint, just a silhouette. A man in a suit, alone in his own kitchen. It hit me then, not like a slap, not even like a wave. More like a quiet pull, deep in the stomach. Like gravity remembered I existed. I sat at the table, same spot as always, same chair. The cushion still had the little rip in the corner from when Michael leaned back too far as a teenager and almost toppled over. I'd patched it. Back then things got patched, now they just get replaced. I sipped the water, thought about how tired I felt, not sleepy, not even weary, but used. Like something wrung out too many times, a sponge left to dry on the sink, cracked at the edges. When did I become a background character in my own family? I remembered all the things I used to do without thinking, showing up early to parent-teacher nights, cheering from the bleachers even when he sat the bench, staying up late to help him write a speech about the solar system in 4th grade. He called Pluto the lonely planet. I remember correcting him gently. "Pluto's just small," I said, "but it's still part of the family. I wonder what happened to that science fair ribbon. I wonder if he even remembers. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. But I remember. I remember it all. And now I don't even have a place at the microphone. Now I'm the man sitting in the hallway, listening to music muffled through a banquet hall door. A guest in my son's life. No, not even that. A placeholder. A name on a list they couldn't leave off entirely, but didn't know what to do with once I showed up. And here's the truth I hadn't wanted to admit. Not until tonight. It's not just about the toast. It's not just about the dinner or the photos or the seat by the window. It's about knowing, in your bones, that you're no longer part of the story. You were the prologue. They've moved on to the next chapter, and no one flips back to check the beginning once they're lost in the middle. I sat there until the water went warm, until the clock ticked past midnight and the ice in the freezer began its slow crackle. Then I stood, walked to the den and pulled the old photo album from the shelf, the one with the leather binding, the one I hadn't opened in years. Page by page I turned. Michael as a baby in my arms. Michael in the Halloween cowboy outfit I sewed by hand. Michael at 16, holding the keys to the beat-up Volvo I bought second-hand and rebuilt just for him. And in every photo I was smiling. Tired sometimes, thinner sometimes, but always. Proud. I closed the book. Let my hand rest on the cover. There's a different kind of grief that comes when the people you love don't stop loving you. They just stop seeing you. You become part of the backdrop, the wall they lean on, the road they drive over, reliable, present, and entirely invisible. That's where I was now, not hated, not pushed away, just unseen. And that somehow is lonelier than anger, because you can fight anger. You can scream at cruelty, but how do you scream at silence? How do you argue with absence? You don't. You sit with it, let it settle in your lungs, and you learn how to breathe again, slowly, around the ache. It was a Thursday when the text came, nearly 2 months after the wedding, on a day that smelled like rain and old newspapers. The kind of day where the clouds don't bother being dramatic, they just sit heavy above your roof and press everything down. I had just come in from checking the mailbox. Just ads and one of those glossy grocery flyers with pictures of meat I'd never buy and deals I didn't need. I tossed it on the counter and reached for the kettle. That's when my phone buzzed. A single message, sitting there like it had always belonged. "Hey Dad, you okay? Haven't heard from you." 7 words, no mention of the wedding, no apology, no acknowledgement. Just a casual lifeline tossed into silence, as if the hole hadn't already been dug, as if he hadn't stood beside another man and called him the best. I stared at the screen, not with anger, with disbelief, as though someone had knocked on my door and asked if I'd forgotten my own name. I didn't answer, not at first. I set the phone down gently beside the sugar bowl and poured water into the kettle, listened to it rumble, then hiss. The sound used to comfort me. This time it just filled space. I brought the cup to the table, sat down and picked up the phone again, typed out a single sentence. I was going to give a toast. I stared at the words, not a threat, not a demand, just the truth, plain and small and aching. The reply came faster than I expected. "Oh, yeah, sorry about that. It got chaotic, you know weddings." Chaotic, like someone had spilled a drink, like I was a detail they meant to include, but forgot, along with the extra candles and the gluten-free dessert. I didn't reply, not because I was angry. I'd already passed anger. It had come and gone like a storm that missed its landing. I was somewhere else now, somewhere quieter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my side listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old wall clock, the wind brushing faintly against the siding. I thought about that line. It got chaotic. I pictured Amanda's father standing at the microphone, his voice smooth, his presence large. I remembered the way my son laughed, head thrown back, glass raised, as if that man had been the one who held him steady on his bike all those years ago, as if I had never been in the room. I thought about the little square of folded paper still sitting in the drawer beside my bed. And something shifted, not with drama, not with tears, just a small movement, like a pebble rolling to the edge of a hill. I sat up in bed, not with purpose, not yet, but with a kind of stillness that wasn't waiting anymore. Because something had settled into me, a decision maybe, or just the end of something I hadn't wanted to admit was dying. I walked down the hallway barefoot, the floorboards soft under my steps, opened the drawer, took out the speech. It was thinner now, the paper worn down from being handled too much, the creases almost soft enough to tear. I held it between my fingers like something sacred, not because of the words, though they mattered, but because of what they represented. Effort, memory, presence, love, and it hit me harder than I expected that no one else would ever know what it said. No one else had asked, and that was the shift, that was the spark. It wasn't that I wanted revenge, or even recognition, it was that I no longer wanted to carry it. Not in my pocket, not in my drawer, not in my chest. There was no dignity in waiting to be seen by someone who had stopped looking. I folded the paper once more, slipped it back into the drawer, and closed it with a soft click. Not a goodbye, not yet, but the first step toward one. A quiet breath, a still decision. Something had to change, and for the first time, I knew it wouldn't be him. It would be me. That Saturday morning, I woke before sunrise, not because of a dream or the usual creak in my back, but because my eyes opened and stayed open. The house was still dark, the bedroom cold, but I didn't reach for the lamp or linger under the covers like I usually do. Instead, I sat up slowly and placed my feet on the floor. The quiet felt different. Not heavy this time, not like it had before, all weight and weariness, but calm. Like a room after a storm, nothing to fix, just air to breathe again. I dressed without thinking much. Corduroy slacks, a wool sweater the color of wet stone, The kind of clothes you wear when you don't want to be seen but still want to feel like yourself. Then I went to the drawer, the one by the bed, and opened it. The paper was still there, my speech, 3 minutes long. 4 paragraphs, one quiet joke about training wheels, and a final line that still made my throat tighten every time I read it. You've become a man your mother would have been proud of, and I'm proud too. Always have been. I held it for a moment, not like something I'd lost, but like something I was ready to return. I didn't need to read it again, I had lived it. By the time I stepped outside, the sky was a soft grey. That gentle, uncertain kind of dawn, when the world isn't quite sure if it's ready to wake up. I walked down the porch steps, down the path, out the gate. The air smelled like pine and earth, like memory. I took the long route, through the back alley behind the library, past the little coffee shop that wouldn't open for another hour, and down the narrow path that led to the lake. No one was there, just the water, still, patient. I had come here for years, though never at this hour. It was where I taught Michael to skip stones, where we fed ducks stale bread from brown bags, where he caught a fish once, barely longer than his hand, and insisted we name it Captain Scales. He cried when we let it go. Now the lake looked glassy, undisturbed. I stood on the shore for a moment, my shoes sinking slightly into the damp sand. Then I reached into my pocket and unfolded the speech. The edges were soft, the folds loose. I struck a match. It flared quickly, that little hiss of life. I touched it to the corner of the paper and watched it catch. The flame licked upward, first slow, then certain. The words curled into themselves, blackened, then broke apart. I let the ashes fall into the water, one ember at a time, until nothing remained but soft grey flakes drifting outward, sinking slowly below the surface. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad. I was. But the sadness had changed. It was no longer the ache of being unseen. It was the acceptance that I didn't need their applause to be whole. I watched the last wisp disappear into the lake, then tucked the empty matchbook back into my coat. That speech wasn't wasted. It was written by a man who showed up, who remembered birthdays and scraped knees and late-night science projects. A man who didn't stop loving just because the door was closed. That mattered, even if no one else heard it. I turned from the lake and walked back slowly, step by step. Not lighter, not freer, but more certain. Because letting go, real letting go, doesn't feel like flight. It feels like standing still, finally, and realizing you don't have to chase anything anymore. Not love, not recognition, not even closure. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't speak your truth. It's stop waiting for someone else to hand you a microphone. The next morning, I cleaned the house. Not the way I usually do, the light sweep of habit, the idle polishing of a life lived mostly indoors. No, this was deliberate. The kind of cleaning you do when something has ended. A ritual almost. Not for tidiness, but clarity. I stripped the bed, washed the linens, replaced the hand towels in the guest bathroom that hadn't seen a guest in over a year. I opened the windows for a little while, even though the air outside had a bite to it. Just long enough to let something stale drift out and something clean come in. When the sheets were drying and the sink was empty, I went to the bookshelf in the hallway. Top shelf, third photo frame from the left. Michael's graduation portrait. He was 22, grinning, young, the sun too bright in the background. I held it in my hands for a long moment. He still looked like my boy in that photo. Still wore his hair too long, still leaned slightly left when he smiled, like his body hadn't caught up with the man he was trying to become. I didn't take it down out of anger. I took it down because I was done waiting for that boy to return. I wrapped the frame in a cloth napkin, the nice ones I never used, saved for occasions that no longer came. I placed it gently in a box I'd labeled summer. It used to hold holiday decorations. Now it would hold other things, things I no longer needed to display. Next, I opened the drawer by the front door. Inside was a bundle of letters, all rubber-banded together, birthday cards from years ago, crayon drawings from when he was small. One said, "To the best dad ever," the D's backward, the E oversized. I smiled at that one, then placed it in the same box. Not to erase him, but to make space for myself. For a while now, I'd been living like a book turned face down, spine bent, waiting for someone to pick it back up and finish reading. But I've read enough to know. Sometimes you close the book and put it back on the shelf. Not because the story wasn't worth it, but because it ended. That afternoon, I made tea, sat by the window, didn't check my phone, didn't scroll for updates or wonder if they'd call. I just sat. Let the warmth of the cup settle in my hands. I watched two squirrels chase each other up the bare branches of the oak outside, watched a neighbor's child walk her dog, the leash slack, the rhythm easy, and I realized I hadn't felt this still in months. This, undivided, because waiting is its own kind of noise. It hums in your chest, it pulls you into doorways, makes you keep the porch light on longer than necessary, and silence, real silence, only comes when you stop asking it to be something else. That evening I lit a single candle on the mantel. Not for anyone, not for memory, just because I wanted light in the room. I didn't take a photo, didn't document it, didn't tell anyone, because some gestures are too quiet for sharing. And that's what made them powerful. When the flame flickered low, I let it burn itself out. Didn't blow it, didn't rush it, just let it go when it was ready. And in that, I found something I hadn't had in a long time. Not peace, exactly, but stillness. And stillness, I've learned, is a kind of farewell all its own. It's been 3 months. The snow has started to melt at the edges of the yard, slow, unsure, the way a child eases into a pool. There are shoots of green peeking up near the fence, and the robins have returned to the tree outside my kitchen window. Same branch they nested in last year. They remember, even if no one else does. I sit in the mornings now with my coffee and the window open a crack. Even when it's still cold. I like hearing the wind again. The world doesn't seem so far away. There are no more speeches folded in drawers, no more plates waiting for guests who won't come. And that space, the one that used to ache, the one I kept trying to fill with their attention, their approval, their presence, it doesn't hurt like it used to. It's not because I stopped caring, it's because I stopped needing. I used to think being a father meant being everything, the rock, the provider, the constant. I thought if I just stayed steady enough, quiet enough, they'd remember. They'd come back. They'd see me. But I was wrong. Not about the love. That was real, still is. But about the waiting. Love doesn't mean waiting forever in silence. It doesn't mean shrinking smaller and smaller until you disappear. It means knowing when to stand still. And when to let go. Letting go didn't feel like I thought it would. There was no grand release, no dramatic exit. It was smaller, simpler, like loosening your grip on something you've carried too long. Letting it rest on the ground, stepping back, breathing. I still think about Michael. Not every hour, not even every day. But when I do, it doesn't hurt the same way. I remember the boy who clung to my leg in grocery store aisles, who fell asleep with his hand in mine during thunderstorms. I remember teaching him how to shave, how to drive, how to look someone in the eye when he spoke. Those things mattered, whether he remembers or not. The man he is now, the one with a home and a wife and a new name stitched onto the family quilt, that man was built with my hands. I don't need a microphone to prove that. The toast I never gave. I say it now when I'm walking by the lake, softly, just to myself, not out of longing, out of truth. And every time I speak it, I feel lighter. The world didn't stop when they left me out, and I didn't stop either. That's the quiet triumph they'll never see. That I stayed kind, that I stayed steady, that I didn't need a chair at the front of the room to know I was part of the foundation. And when people ask, sometimes they still do, "Do you ever hear from your son?" I smile and say, "Not often. But he's doing well. And I'm all right too. Because I am, more than all right most days. I walk to the market. I read in the afternoons. I've started painting again, just little landscapes, nothing fancy. But when I mix the blues and greens for the trees, I think about the shade of his eyes when he was young and how much light they used to hold. That light isn't mine to carry anymore. But I was there when it began, and that's enough. It has to be. It is. So here's my final toast, not to him, but to myself. to the quiet strength of those who love without being seen, to the fathers and mothers who stand at the edges of wedding halls and smile anyway, to the ones who let go, not because they're bitter, but because they finally understand. Their worth was never tied to a place at the table. It was in the showing up, the staying, the love that never needed applause to be real. So here's to that. Here's to us. And may our silence, steady, sure and dignified, echo louder than any speech ever could.